You're listening to RevOps FM with Justin Norris. Welcome to RevOps FM, everyone. It's a special day on the show as we welcome a go-to-market thought leader that's been a really important influence on me, Chris Walker. And for those that aren't familiar, just over 5 years ago, Chris founded an agency called Refine Labs, which has had just a massive impact on the B2B marketing landscape. If you're on LinkedIn, you've definitely been exposed to Chris's ideas, things like dark social, demand creation, distributing ungated content, self-reported attribution, are all things that he's either developed or he's helped to popularize. And what I really like about Chris's approach is he doesn't stay boxed in by, this is the way we've always done it, or these are the best practices. He really takes a first principles approach to whatever subject he's looking at and challenges the status quo where things aren't working. So in 2024, Chris announced a new venture that he's leading called Paceto, which is a tech-enabled GTM strategy consultancy. And as CEO there, he is continuing to innovate, continuing to drive that conversation forward. And we're going to have part of that conversation here today, right now. So Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Justin, appreciate the intro. Have really enjoyed seeing all the things that you're doing to pioneer in the space as well. So thank you for that. It's awesome to bounce ideas and share. So I think this is going to be an awesome conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
I am super excited. And maybe we can start off just with where you are right now. Those that have been watching you, especially closely like I have for the past 5 years, will know that a main focus in your message has been demand creation, the importance of getting away from this traditional lead gen, or what you call the MQL hamster wheel. And then recently, you've really started to shift your focus and you've been talking about signals. And I'm curious, take us inside your mind. What's been driving this shift?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the first 5 years of my career, I spent working at a publicly traded British holdings company called Halma. It's one of the only companies on the London Stock Exchange that's been able to deliver 10% profit growth for more than 20 years. Very disciplined financial holdings company that owned 50 different technology and engineering companies around the globe. And so I developed a very interesting sort of mindset around how you run a business, and also how a business should operate in terms of profitability and growth and managing costs and things like that. And I've always believed in that. In 2017, and when I started my company in 2019, Refine Labs, and all the way through that growth era during the COVID boom, a lot of my ideas that I were communicating were around how do we optimize our go-to-market? How do we become more efficient? How do we get more customers for less money? How do we stop wasting a lot of money on things that don't work? And during that time, a lot of my ideas fell on deaf ears because of the funding environment in B2B tech and SaaS, because of the revenue multiples happened in companies, because of how investors were valuing and investing in companies, that a lot of the ideas around profitable, efficient growth that I've been sharing for more than a half decade were not received exactly how I was sharing them to the market. And then given the adjustments that's happened in the financial markets over the middle of 2022, 2023, and into now, the timing was really right to be able to start this new venture, which is focused on go-to-market optimization. How do we deliver profitable, efficient growth? How do we acquire customers and pay back the cost of acquiring customers in a reasonable amount of time? And when we do that, how does that impact our EBITDA profile? And how does that impact our growth profile? And how does it dramatically change the valuation of our company? How does it change the value of every individual stock options that work in that company? How does it improve how we're able to take care of customers because of how profitable our company is, and all of these different things that stem from running a business on pure business fundamentals. And so the timing was really right for me to move on to this new venture.
I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode, Knack. I love marketing automation software, but let's be honest, the email and landing page builders are usually terrible. You can't make it nice without a developer, and marketers are going to find a way to break things or go off brand. You do not have time for that. So Knack is totally different. You set the guidelines and then give your users a building experience that's slick, modern, and beautiful. When they're done, everything goes to your map at the push of a button. And don't worry, it supports global teams, approval workflows. It's got your integrations. So head on over to revops.fm/knack. That's KNAK, and get a special offer just for my listeners.
Signals is a big concept that I've been talking about a lot. Why? Because I believe it's the fastest, most clear way to create immediate, fast optimizations inside of your go-to-market by tracking the signal data. And the reason being is that the process between having an in-market account that's sending you signals to closing that net new customer, that process is the most expensive, important process inside of a company. Most B2B companies will spend 35, 40, maybe up to 50% of revenue on that part of the process. Most of the marketing budget is spent there, greater than 80%. Basically, all of the SDR budget is spent there, SDR headcount, and a majority of the sales budget, solutions consultants, and other, parts of the net new business process are all tied up in that one core process. And when B2B companies choose to use tools like multi-touch attribution for marketing, and they use forecasting software like Clary, and they use some type of like SDR, like data, like outreach data, or what SalesLoft provides, you create siloed analytics that give you a very unclear picture around what's happening across the entire process and where the biggest opportunities are. And I think what this is making way for is making way for a new role, a new profession, a new way of thinking that I call go-to-market strategy. I think that some RevOps professionals will have the capability to get there, but I think that this skill set is very different than the traditional RevOps profile of implementing technology and collecting data and building reports. This is about what should our core KPIs be? How do we look back over the past 6 quarters, look at our financial data and decide how we're going to allocate budget in the future? How do we look at that budget and say, wow, we're spending way too much on sales. We need to reallocate, or hey, we're spending way too much on trying to close customers and we should spend more on post-sale. And so there needs to be someone in the business that's looking across the entire go-to-market and trying to figure out where are the best ways from a strategy perspective that I think that in many cases, the RevOps role is falling short of doing that in B2B companies.
It's almost a bit like a management consultant profile that you're describing to me, or at least I've seen those skill sets embodied in folks I know that have that background.
For sure. And I think that there's a major flaw in B2B executive teams, the main one being that why do we have to have a team of 50 people in order to be a C-level executive? Why aren't there more individual contributors on the executive team? It boxes in the type of person that you can have. And to be very clear, the people that are usually the best at developing strategy are usually not the best to be managing 50 people or a team of 50 people. And so I think as companies, we're doing ourselves a major disservice by requiring every single C-level executive to manage a large team. And so the way that we've sat at Paceto is that if companies don't have that role right now, that we can serve in that role as a management consultant, as an external resource. And what we bring to the table are benchmarks across currently 52 very high-profile mid-market companies, benchmarks that with the data, we get their financial data, we get their CRM data, we actually analyze it, we categorize it. It is the most accurate benchmark database out there compared to what you would get at Pavilion, where people log in and answer a survey and don't even validate the data. So we have the benchmarks, we have proprietary technology that's able to isolate signals, and then we have key people that have the domain expertise across marketing, sales, outbound sales, and SDRs to be able to look at the entire go-to-market process holistically and advise companies on how to make the best decisions across the entire business. And to me, in some ways, it seems like having that resource be external might actually be an advantage to companies because every single other department leader is tied up in the politics of their own department, and having somebody that's external that looks at the whole thing, I believe could provide a lot of value.
And just to help us get everyone on the same page, I want to get into a little bit of term definition, and at the risk of seeming pedantic, but I just think it's important. And I've noticed in listening to some of the sessions that you have the sorts of questions that people have seem to like come back to this. So maybe we can just come back to this notion of signal, which is like everywhere these days. I don't know if people are riffing off of you or what, but like everyone's talking about signals. What do you mean when you say that word?
Yeah, and so signals are a data point that's trackable that either a person inside of an account sends us or an account level data point that the account sends us. And there are tons of different signals, and most of the vendors out there right now are interested in providing the data, like here, this person did this, or hey, this account was on your website, or hey, this person looked at the pricing page on this review site, or any type of providing the data around what people are doing, which allows people to take action. And then when you're able to isolate this signal happened, and then the sales team or our SDR team or some level of human capital took action against that signal, there's a second thing that we need to do, which is able to track the outcomes of those signals across the conversion to a meeting book, conversion to qualified pipeline, conversion to revenue, and the current state of how B2B companies measure it, create a fractured data layer where they have data strewn across leads and contacts and opportunities and accounts and campaign members and maybe some other type of custom objects. And it's very difficult to get a clear picture of what's happening across the entire pipeline. One of the things that I'm advocating people think about is to change your mindset around what pipeline means. Most companies think that pipeline starts when an opportunity is created. And what I'm suggesting people consider is that pipeline actually starts when your account sends a signal and your sales team does something about it. And so you have this entire part of the early stage of the process where right now it's largely not tracked or not tracked comprehensively, definitely not when sales is doing independent prospecting. And the data points around the signals have massive predictors and massive impact on sales velocity, conversion rates, productivity, volume, quota attainment. And right now, companies aren't able to connect that data together, so they don't see these clear, obvious insights about how to optimize their go-to-market. And so you have all these different signals out there. A lot of them, sales is not going to do anything with. And then at some point, sales will take action. We're considering calling that the buying signal, where then that initial signal, sales is taking action, and then that is tracked all the way through the journey. And then if that lead was recycled, then all of a sudden, if they came back, the entire process would happen again. And the key insight here is that when B2B companies currently track this, the data has incredible survivorship bias, where if you reach out to the same account 100 times and you lose the first 99 times and you win the 100th time, B2B companies only see the data around the one time that they won, not the 99 times that they lost. And the quickest way to optimize your go-to-market, your SDR resources, your marketing investments, your sales resources is to look at all the times that you lose and stop doing them. And that data is not very clear to B2B companies right now. And I believe that Signals creates that data layer to be able to make what should be fast, easy, obvious decisions for executives, which right now are hard, unclear. It's difficult to get people aligned because that data layer doesn't exist. And it gets very, very cloudy when we try and attach multi-touch attribution and marketing mix modeling and different things. Those tools have a purpose and they can be used for something. But in order to optimize the entire go-to-market and optimize your pipeline as that flows through between departments, it is not an adequate tool to do that. And so I think we need to recognize when we're trying to use a hammer when we should be using a screwdriver. And this is a good example of that, where we need a different layer. Multi-touch attribution will not replace pipeline architecture and signal tracking.
So digging a little bit deeper into that layer and what it would look like, almost, on a CRM entity level, you have all these signals that are out in the universe. Not all of them exist in CRM. Some of them we choose to act on, some of them we don't. The ones that we are going to act on, I like that term buying signal. It's the first time I've heard you use that, but I think that is intuitively clear that, it's this trigger for sales to take action.
Yeah, just to clarify, it can be a trigger. People have said there's a nuance here that I want to clarify, because it could be that triggers sales to go do something, or it could be that sales did something and then we were able to backtrack and recognize that that's the signal. People confuse this with an MQL, but it's not. Like many signals are not being sent to sales. Sales is doing it on their own. And that is the black hole that exists in go-to-market right now, because a majority of the actions your sales teams takes, at least in most B2B companies, are not driven through marketing. It's driven through independent prospecting, third-party data, target account lists, random other data sets that you can get. And so it's not just about what marketing is sending to sales. It's about looking at the entire go-to-market. And I think a better definition that's a little bit nuanced is the signal that happens before sales takes action, which is it's inclusive of we send it to sales, but it also could include other things.
Yeah, I was going to ask this question later, but since you've brought it up, because this is something I was really thinking about listening to you talk about this before, and I've seen this helping to run an outbound motion at my current company. It can get really murky where, yes, there are, let's say, intent signals from a tool like 6sense or from G2, and then we act on them. And sometimes we get a directly attributable conversation started as a result of that. But sometimes you don't. But then you might see that account or someone from that account come in, and submit a demo request form or do something else. And you're like, well, did the outreach influence that? There's a feedback loop where you have a signal and then you do a thing. And then, like you said, that thing can then become, I don't know if you call it a signal, but it becomes a driving force for something else to happen.
So I think a lot of people make the mistake in getting caught up in edge cases and not looking at the broader picture, because the reality is that if you track this at a mature company, let's say you're 6sense, you're going to have 5 million signal records every single year. And so the 5 or 10 or 20 times where this exact instance happens actually doesn't influence the data on a large scale and doesn't create those nuances. So pick a lane around it, have a rule set. We'll develop a rule set eventually and recognize that those little edge cases do not have a major influence on the overall data set.
And so coming back to like how we track the signal, are you thinking about it as like this is a record, like a signal record that exists in isolation, or is the signal record also the place where we track the funnel progression of the sales activity against that signal?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. I think what companies are missing is a unified pipeline architecture that's able to connect all the different data points from leads, contacts, campaign members, opportunities, all the way through. You know about the bow tie framework from Winning by Design that looks at that all the way through post-sale. We need an architecture that's able to collect all that data on one record so that for reporting and analytics and different cross-functional teams looking at it, and to use it in BI and to push it into other analytics tools, that we have one consistent data source that everyone on the go-to-market team and everyone in the company for that matter, including finance, can be able to use. And that a part of that unified pipeline architecture, it starts with the signal. So all the signal data is included there, and the records are generated on a per signal or a per buying signal level when sales is taking an action. All of the other data, the account data, what vertical they're in, what's customer segment, what tier they belong in, all the opportunity data, ARR and things like that, and the conversion, when the meeting happened, did the SDR hit the SLA? How long was it to follow up? What sequence did we use? Did we get the meeting? Did we hold the meeting? Did it progress? What was the time between those things? And then when you have all of those different data points, it creates an incredible layer to be able to look at the entire process and optimize the process. You have all the filters that you can use, and you can say, okay, what's happening with our demo requests? Okay, what's happening with our intent data from 6sense? Okay, what's happening over with this type of stuff? Are there bottlenecks across the entire process in this geography? It doesn't matter what signal the account is sending us. And without that data layer, it makes it really hard. And in my early career, I spent the first 2 or 3 years of my career doing manufacturing process optimization, Lean Six Sigma. How do we optimize our supply chain? We have all these different parts of a process where we need to manufacture 10 million parts in a year. We have to deliver them on time. We can't have too much inventory. If this part of the process takes a day long, how do we shorten that so we can increase our throughput? And that level of thinking is necessary because the go-to-market process, specifically from signal to closed won, is just a machine. That's all it is. It's like a manufacturing facility with different parts of the process and different stakeholders and different data points. And the things that happen upstream can impact things that happen very far downstream. And we need to be able to collect all of that information and be able to look at it in that way. And I just don't think that go-to-market leaders have been trained or think about it in that way yet. So I think it'll be a new wave. And what's driving it is the economic environment, how investors are valuing companies. It's not like over here, like, oh, this is such a good idea. It's necessary. There's no other way around it right now. We cannot be spending 50% of revenue on sales and marketing and growing at 10%. And there's a lot of companies in that bucket that are growing 10 to 20% and spend 50% of revenue on sales and marketing and do zero or negative EBITDA free cash flow. And it's just not a viable business model in the current economic environment. Maybe that changes in a couple of years, but right now I think we need to adjust to the reality.
Do you feel that this efficiency focus, the way I heard you say it at the beginning, it's always been part of your message. It didn't matter to people in a era of near zero interest rates where people were just kind of spending like drunken sailors, for lack of a better term. And now you're just bringing it more to the fore because like the conditions are right, or do you view it as an extension of the previous part of your work? How do you see like that connection between demand creation, that piece of the pie, and what you're talking about now?
I think that both concepts remain incredibly relevant. I think that what I'm doing now is really a professional expansion of how I'm looking at things. The message is the same, right? Like back in the day, it was like I would interact with companies that spent $1 million a month on Google Ads and didn't even track the data in their CRM. That was in 2020, 2021. And I would say, and they were like looking to hire, like go and hire someone to be able to do that. And I said, the first thing you need to do is figure out how to track this data, because most likely you're wasting $975,000 out of your $1 million a month and you don't even know it right now. But they didn't care, and their investors didn't care, and their marketing manager didn't care, and their agency didn't care. And so it just kind of fell on deaf ears. The expansion now is thinking, and the message was always, if we're able to optimize marketing, then it creates optimization across the entire go-to-market. When we don't send 50,000 of the shittiest leads ever to our SDRs, and our SDRs follow up with 50,000 shitty leads and waste a whole year and don't convert meetings and don't convert business, and then we have too many sales resources and too many sales headcount because we're not creating enough pipeline because we spend bad money on marketing, and then our SDRs aren't effective, that it impacts the entire go-to-market. So the message initially was, if you fix marketing, it creates optimization across the entire go-to-market. And now with the signals concept and the expansion of RevOps and the available amount of data, that we can do so much more than we could even 3 or 4 years ago. And so I think it was just a really good time in terms of the expansion. And it's something that I'm proud of at the moment at Paceto, because as the message has evolved, the people that resonate most with this message are CEOs, CFOs, and CROs. And so while we still work with marketing leaders, like there's a real expansion happening in where the message is resonating and how important this problem is to businesses, that CEOs and CFOs are getting involved in how do we fix our go-to-market, which wasn't the case a couple of years ago. But now CEOs really need to understand this. They need to understand, how do we go from spending 45% of revenue on sales and marketing to 25%? Because if not, then our PE firm isn't going to have, I'm getting pressure from the board because we need to exit in 3 years, and the current trajectory is not going to get us there. And so I do believe that my message has always been a CEO, CFO level problem, although it's been directed toward marketing leaders and marketing, functional leaders historically, but now a real expansion across what it means to a business. I think it's, as you mentioned, sort of leveling up. I believe what we're doing is akin to Forrester and McKinsey and Bain at this point.
Last November, I watched as my LinkedIn feed blew up with posts from people at Mopsapalooza. They were raving about the conference and having the best time. Don't miss out like I did. This November, Mopsapalooza is back in sunny Anaheim, California, and it's going to be the marketing ops event of the year, packed with hands-on learning from real practitioners. This is the only truly community-led, tech-agnostic MOPS conference out there. It's got the best speakers, the best networking, the best social events, maybe even a trip to Disneyland. This isn't your 50,000-person tech company conference. It's an intimate gathering of folks who are in the trenches every day, and registration is capped at 700 attendees. Tickets are going fast, so go to revops.fm/MOPS. That's revops.fm/MOPS to sign up today. So you talked about the explosion of data, and maybe we can just dig in a bit to collecting and aggregating these signals and then choosing them to act on. How do you think about the current landscape of tools? There's so many to choose from. There's so many people claiming they have signals. What would this mature state look like? I know it's hypothetical probably at this stage for collecting signals in a future where this is well implemented.
Yeah, so the way I see the signal category, most people just see signals, and at the early stages of a category, it kind of feels like everyone's talking about the same thing and everybody's doing the same thing, and there hasn't been enough time and definition to have subcategories, like in some more mature categories that you see a CRM as different than marketing automation, as different than an account-based marketing platform, is different than in a sales engagement platform. But if they all were coming up at the same time, sometimes it would be hard to tease out those functional differences. And so that's where we are in the signal category right now. One, maybe, if we're lucky, 2 years into this category. The way I see it breaking down into subcategories right now is you have signal providers. Signal providers that have actually been around for the longest time. Those would be Trust Radius. That would be Bambora. It would be G2, there's many of them. And what they do is they have a third-party platform and they provide third-party data from that platform. They provide the data. The next category is that you have signal aggregators, a platform that pulls in a lot of different signals, both first and third party, and then gives you those signals. And sometimes they also include the way to take action around that with either AI or message automation or just a sales engagement platform attached to it. Maybe they also bring in data so they can automatically source you and enrich you contact data. Account-based marketing platforms are doing that. And there's also a lot of upstarts like the Common Rooms and the Warmleys and the Reggie AIs that are all falling into this signal aggregator category that a lot of people are using. It's interesting because those platforms are rather early, but it's also a consolidation play. That type of platform, in theory, could replace 6sense, SalesLoft, maybe even Zoom Info at the same time. So I think that's a really interesting sort of play with those earlier stage companies. And we're seeing companies that are picking up on those, but are not consolidating. So they'll add Reggie AI, but they won't take out 6sense and Zoom Info and all those other things. So we'll see how that plays out over a longer period of time. And then the last part that I see is in signal analytics. And so companies that are able to attach the signal, create a unified pipeline architecture and track signal all the way to close one, or even further signal all the way through the customer lifecycle, even through post-sale and expansion. And that's where Paceto is focused currently. We have a technology that's able to reverse engineer that data and then be able to track that data. We're partnering with companies that are able to get that stuff done inside of the CRM. And then we layer on expert go-to-market consulting, because what we're finding is that part of it is we need to be able to look at the data in the right way. But even if we get the data in the right way, many companies are not able to be able to take that and say, this is what we're going to do about it. And so many of our customers that find the most value is actually, I need to know what to do about it. And that's why we layer the consulting layer on top of it that our customers find very valuable, which is also incredibly differentiated from what you would see from an analytics vendor or a sales forecasting platform or something like that.
So in terms of what you're seeing from a signals point of view and the signals that are valuable to look on, you've long advocated the split the funnel exercise where you kind of look at what offers people are responding to. And inevitably, what I've seen and what most people see is that hand raisers are like the gold standard. So somebody that comes to you says, I'm ready to buy, that's a very powerful signal. They convert at a very high rate. And a lot of other signals are not so great. Are you seeing other things emerge, or do you have hypotheses about signals that maybe not necessarily on the same level as hand raisers, but are that converting better than like the 0.5% ebook type leads that a lot of companies are still dealing with?
Yeah, so just a little bit of context. The early split the funnel process that I put together in 2020 was effectively a marketing exercise to divide what we would consider hand raisers from all of the other low intent leads that you would get. And then you'd have to make subjective calls around whether it was low intent or high intent. Like, was a webinar attendee low intent? I guess they're not technically a hand raiser. So that was like the first thing that we did 4 years ago. And the data was very clear. Like, most B2B companies were investing all of their marketing dollars to create low intent leads that they would close at 0.1%. And meanwhile, when they got a hand raiser, they would win it at 8 or 10%, 80 or 100 times more productive for SDRs and sales and even the marketing investments. But none of the marketing investments were deployed specifically to create more of them, which I found to be very odd. And then what we've done now is basically like that part of the process on steroids, where it's not just categorizing and dividing into two buckets. It's looking at thousands of signals that companies have every year and looking at them at each individual signal and then being able to evaluate that. And we've done this process 52 times with companies. Most B2B companies are only able to reverse engineer somewhere between 20 and 40% of signal data with their historical data because they don't track it properly. But even with that 20 to 40% initially, there's so much that you can learn about what are we doing that's definitely not working. And then what are we doing that's driving high sales velocity and sales productivity that we don't even know about? And so specifically to your question, I think one of the most interesting findings is that B2B companies spend a ton of money on events. And then they'll spend on national trade shows and regional conferences and like small micro dinners and type of events like that. And then webinars, and they have all these different expenses. And inside of that category, almost 100% of the time, the highest effectiveness is in webinars and the lowest cost is in webinars. So the ROI in the events category, all the investment gets skewed to national trade shows and all the outcomes get skewed to webinars. And so where you spend the least, you also get the most outcomes. And that's been almost consistent across all 52 companies that we've analyzed. And so webinar attendee, and even like you could get a hand raiser off of a webinar if you're thoughtful around how to do that, that those are a very, very strong signal relative to other things that B2B companies use. And then if you knew that data, maybe you would say, okay, instead of going to 15 national trade shows next year, why don't we go to 5? Why don't we go to the best 5? So it's not like don't do trade shows. It's be a lot more national trade shows, be a lot more selective around it. And then how do we take the 10 trade shows, $250,000 all in for each trade show, $2.5 million a year? And how do we take 500K of that and get influencers on our webinars? And instead of doing one a quarter, we start doing one a week. And then because of that, we have podcasts, and then we can hire someone to help us use that for LinkedIn content. And we spend way less money and we get way more scale, way more impact, way more effectiveness, way better ROI not just on our marketing investments, but also downstream for sales and SDRs. And so that's one like core finding that we see a lot of the time in the data.
That's fascinating. And so knowing that, let's say I'm a company and I hear that insight, to act on it, does it mean, all right, actually, it's a good use of SDR time to follow up on webinar attendees, or I craft some other sort of follow-up, quote unquote, nurture process around them, or how do you guide them from that insight to a strategy to follow up on that?
I think there's like a way to optimize the follow-up. Like, sure, there's that, but if the follow-up sucked already, then the data wouldn't show that it was working well. So the follow-up is quote unquote good enough right now. So there's a way to get it from 0.8% to 1.2% or to have incremental gains around that. But the real thing is we need to do more fucking webinars and we need to make our webinars better. And so that ends up actually being the core focus because the signal is already working when it comes to sales taking action around it. So what we need to figure out how to do is how do we create more these high quality signals? And what people fall into the trap to, and people have done this for a very long time regarding demo requests, is that all the demo requests they get, they're not trying to get, they just get them. And they're like, oh, well, we got 100 demo requests last month and they're converting at 8%. So we got 8 customers. Let's just try to ramp that up to 1,000 demo requests. And they take LinkedIn ads and they do a lead gen form and they try and get demo requests that way. And it's not the same signal and they degrade the quality. They don't get the same result. And so a lot of people fall into the trap of thinking that they're creating more of the signal, but what they're doing is a shortcut that fakes the signal.
So, yeah, it wasn't the same caliber of person at the same level of intent and entering into that pipeline
Exactly.
at that time. And so flipping it around, I guess, let's say it's like, all right, I've got, XYZ signals that are working for me today. And I come to you and I'm like, Chris, like we want to open up some more signals because we want to expand, but we want to pick the highest quality ones. Do you envision like sort of a benchmark library of signals that are likely to perform well for certain types of companies and certain types of verticals to like create that guidance? Or is it just a matter of experimentation within every company's context?
I think at this point and for the foreseeable future, companies should think about this as an experimentation process inside of their own company. I think that at some point there might be a evaluator, an auditor of signals that's able to look across an entire PE firm portfolio or a bunch of companies that all sell to HR professionals or all the companies between 100 and 200 million in North America. I think there might be an auditor of signals that's being able to look at the large scale data and say, actually, out of all of these potential vendors and all the signals inside of the vendors, here are the best ones for the market and here are the best ones for you. So I do see that and it's a huge value to the signal providers and the signal aggregators to clearly communicate ROI to their customers. Right now, 6th Sense is able to claim that they deliver ROI to customers, but they don't measure it properly. And so it's not a knock on 6th Sense. Every vendor falls into the same thing that, we think what we're doing is better than what you were doing before. But after they're able to get over that step, it's hard to figure out, okay, so what do we do next? Out of all these things that we're doing, what are the things that we shouldn't be doing anymore? Out of the hundreds of data points that you send us, what are the 4 or 5 or 10 that actually matter and the other 90 that don't? And none of those questions can really be answered right now.
So far, the signals we've talked about, they've been what we might call first party, the demo request, the webinar, the ebook, et cetera. So that's like kind of one category, often associated with marketing, doing things to generate those signals. And then we have that whole other universe of like the third party signals that sales will act on independently that you referred to. So like your G2 or your trust radius or like job change data from user gems or just 6th Sense kind of black box intent. They just say that this account has intent. You should follow up with them. What's your point of view on this world and like what works, what doesn't? And also you've talked a lot about how no one is tracking this effectively. I can vouch for that and how difficult it is to track. Thoughts there?
That a majority of third-party signals are mostly garbage. And because companies don't track it, they don't know. And because platforms like 6th Sense deliver it in a black box, they're not able to figure it out. And that the real value in a lot of the intent data is first-party data. In addition, I think the most valuable form of first-party data that is not like a marketing-oriented typically is de-anonymizing your website traffic and being able to figure out what accounts are on our website, or even more valuable, what people inside of what accounts are on our website, and then layering on account filters and then saying, okay, these are the accounts, they were on our website, they were in our ICP, here are the people that we're going to reach out to and then take action around that. And to be honest, that's the most valuable part of 6sense platform. Yeah, they box it up with a bunch of other things, but really like that's the value that the platform is providing. And companies spend way too much money to get that. Like you can get that for almost free from other vendors. And so by mixing it with Bambora and all these other third-party sources and then putting it into a black box, I think that they're masking what's actually happening, which is the first-party website data is the most valuable part. And then on the third-party side, like maybe the G2 data is relevant. Maybe it is. I remember running experiments with it back then. This is like 2021 and using that and pushing G2 data into LinkedIn and running advertisements off of it and then measuring on custom conversions and different things like that. And that the G2 intent data had similar or lower performance than just running against a cold audience. Obviously, retargeting is the highest performing, which is effectively first-party website visit data. And so I think that there's a lot of noise in the signal category. I think that there's a lot of poor third-party data that's being pushed as very high quality. Like, who cares if somebody at Oracle read a blog on blah, blah, blah news.com, and that news article happened to say your like financial business software. And then all of a sudden you think that because maybe an intern at Oracle was reading that article, that you should go on this wild goose chase to try and close Oracle for your financial business software product. I think there's just a lot of stuff that just doesn't fit into the category of common sense.
And so yes, like one visit from somebody at Oracle doesn't, but the reason I think we end up with some of these black box scoring models is that people want to say like, well, one visit, no, but all right, there's 3 or 4 visits and they're opening some emails and you start to aggregate different signs of potential intent or potential interest. And that's where you get these scores. And I understand why people do that. And then another part of me thinks it's kind of obscuring, what's going on. It's making it harder to tell, is this really valuable? Is this not? What do you think of these sort of like compound signals or like scoring, aggregating different activities together?
I think that because technology vendors have the data, that they push that message that all of these signals combined like have a big difference. But what we found in the data is just isolating the primary buying signal has massive impacts. And I haven't seen the data that combining 7 of those data points together gives you such an incremental benefit that it's worthwhile. We'll see over time. But right now, companies are like, yeah, we'll use AI to figure out your best signals. They can't. There's no data layer to track it. AI is not going to know what to do around it. And so until there's that data layer, I think that the promise of AI in terms of like optimizing around signals, I think will be less than stellar.
You've talked a bit about like how the inbound, outbound distinction isn't really that relevant before. And I think this is a really valuable insight that isn't intuitive the way that a lot of go-to-market professionals have been brought up to think. Like, yeah, people come to me, that's inbound. I go to them, that's outbound. Can you talk us through why this distinction isn't actually the right way to be thinking about it?
The inbound, outbound distinctions happened in the late 2000s or early 2010s in hopes of having marketing be able to prove the ROI of some of those things by taking credit on first touch attribution that was developed by like HubSpot and other platforms like that. And what it's done, and it was also built in the lead gen era, where all that mattered was where did the lead come from? Did it come from our website? Did it come from sales? So if it came from our website or some other form of marketing activity, then marketing could attribute it and say, we spent this much money and we did this when we got this much out of it. And what it's done is create a massive divide in the go-to-market team, and it's create tons of unnecessary complexity. And when you silo out the analytics, you lose sight of the bigger picture. Marketing only cares about what they source. Sales only cares about what's happening over there. The budgeting process is looking at it that way instead of looking at how do we need to allocate budget across the entire go-to-market journey and our customer journey to get the biggest impact. Where are the places where we're not investing enough or where we're investing too much and not getting the appropriate return across the customer lifecycle? And companies don't look at it that way. And so the distinction of inbound and outbound is entirely outdated, and it's hurting B2B companies to continue to think about it this way. And the key insight is that no matter what signal your customer or prospective buyer sends you, your sales team is still going to have to reach out and try to get the meeting. They're still going to have to work the deal. They're still going to have to close it. It doesn't matter if it was a demo request or you got some data from some third-party platform or pulled it out of a contact database. The process from SDR to closed won is exactly the same. And so all that matters is we have all of these available signals across our entire go-to-market. Some come from first-party sources and others come from third-party sources. And how do we use that data as a go-to-market team to say, these are the signals that matter, that give us the best marketing ROI, that give us the best SDR productivity, and give us the best sales velocity. And if we look at it that way, we'd have a much more holistic way of looking at it. And frankly, we'd spend a fuckload less money on sales and marketing and the go-to-market investment overall. And what happens today is that through the influence revenue reporting and marketing and the siloed analytics of SDRs and the how sales data and that is working, that B2B companies spend 2 or 3 times more than they need to because every single deal, every department's trying to take credit for. And I just think that when we move into this new era, and we're not moving into it, we're there. It takes companies years to adjust to these changes, so companies are still in the process to it, but we're in it, that we have to think about in this new world, what's different, and then adjust or challenge a lot of the things that we've done previously based on the new reality that we're facing. And I think some of the things that were created specifically from 2011 to 2021, 2022, some are already being challenged. The SDR model's being challenged. The demand waterfall and the MQL model have been challenged for a very long time. I don't think that how companies get benchmarks and how they make decisions around how to allocate investments is being challenged enough right now. I don't think that multi-touch attribution is being challenged enough right now. And some of those things are going to start to come to fruition because the pressure on the financials will cause companies to have to change. And so that you can either be early to it and you can say, I see this coming. I see that we need to figure out how to spend 15% less of revenue on sales and marketing in the coming years. What do we need to change? Or you can wait till it hits you like a train and runs you over in 2025, 2026. I think the companies just need to be looking a little bit further ahead about where this is going.
So bouncing off that point, and probably the last question we'll have time for today, but a lot of folks in RevOps listening to this podcast, and you alluded at the beginning about how that function can evolve, ways that RevOps professionals can become more strategic, have a bigger impact. Someone listening to this right now, and maybe they're implementing tools, managing territory and compensation, doing some analytics support type work, but they want to get to that next level of impact. What should they start doing?
So in this new evolving role and where I see this playing out, you're going to basically have a distinguishing between revenue operations, or what some people are now viewing like you might actually have go-to-market operations, which is looking at all the things across. And then you're going to have marketing operations, which is focused on marketing, revenue operations, and customer success operations. And you might actually see that sort of develop over time. And then separately, you're going to have go-to-market strategy. And when you think about the two different things, revenue operations is a short-term and process and control-based function. They're implementing technology, managing data, building reports, delivering analytics, the territories, the comp plans, a lot of this tactical work. And go-to-market strategy is looking at how are we going to allocate investments across the entire go-to-market? What should we be using for our analytics engine that RevOps is going to implement? Maybe we do need a pipeline architecture, and go-to-market strategy is going to drive what that is and how do we get that done. How should we be allocating our investments in marketing? We spend $20 million a year on marketing. We're 50% programs and headcount. And then inside of the programs, here's how it's divided. How should that be changing based on our entire go-to-market strategy? Do we need SDRs and solutions consultants and sales professionals, or should we rethink how we run our, net new customer sales process? Do we need an onboarding manager and a CSM and an account manager and all these people, or should we rethink how we run post-sale? And I think that there's a role there, and the skill set around that role and the experience required to do that role is fundamentally different than the skill set of a revenue operations professional. It's not a good or a bad thing, and I'm not here to knock revenue operations professionals at all. They do incredible work, and a lot of the skills that they have, I don't have, right? When you think about go-to-market strategy and the skills required to run that function, you should have run a marketing department or at least led a functional part of marketing before. You should have carried a bag, closed deals, executed against a quota. Maybe you led an actual sales team. Maybe you ran outbound processes and you did those things, and you have to understand data, and you must understand finance, top-level business analytics, and things like that. And it's a unique role that not everyone is going to be suited for. It's an executive level role from my perspective. And it's actually a role that should be connecting CEO, CFO, CRO, CMO together and almost acting as an advisor across that entire function, which some people see RevOps as doing, but I think that they fall short for some of the reasons that I've mentioned. And I think over time, we'll see that distinction play out. So if you're a RevOps professional and you're trying to figure out where do I want my career to be in 3 to 5 years, that figuring out how to get involved in what your marketing team is doing and maybe try to run ads or build content or, you work on a messaging project or do customer research, and how to figure out, how do I get involved? How do I play? Can I go and ride along for 5 of these deals and try to be like the solutions consultant or try to be the SDR for my AE? How do you get involved in the actual execution of go-to-market? Because it's very difficult to take the title of go-to-market strategy when you've never done any of the go-to-market functions.
I'm excited to see where this goes.
Me too.
Super insightful, super interesting. As always, Chris, I know we're out of time, but just want to thank you again for being here today. Super valuable.
Justin, thanks for the great conversation. Looking forward to hearing what you learned as well, man. You're really paving the way on some of these new concepts and doing it in real life. So I'm excited to see what you find and what you learned.
Thank you so much. Hey everyone, I want to invite you over to the RevOps FM Substack community, where you can sign up to get rough transcripts, show notes, longer form articles, and other bonus content. Just head over to revops.fm/subscribe to get free access. I'd also love to know what you thought of the episode and to hear suggestions for topics you want to learn about. Feel free to leave a comment on Substack or send me an email at justin@revops.fm. Thanks for listening.